Well, good afternoon. My name is Steve Strand. I am the Executive Director for the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. And what we're presenting today is the 2023 Crime in Washington Report. This is the data for the year 2023. As I mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. I'm a former chief and sheriff myself. We have, in years past, just sent out a press release when we do this each year. A couple of years ago, we started doing this via Zoom during sort of when COVID restrictions were on. And this year, we're trying something a little different, where we have a combination of Zoom, some in person, and also we really appreciate the partnership this year with TVW so that we can also have this offered live through TVW. So why do we do this? We've been doing this since 1980. So this is our 44th year of providing this information. The fact is, everybody knows that there's very, very high interest in statistics, in crime rates, and what's going on both nationally and in our state. There's people out there who will say that crime is skyrocketing and it's out of control. There are others who say no, it's plummeting, and that's all people misunderstanding the data. What we're going to talk about today is what the real data says in our state of Washington in 2023. Compare that to prior years and where we are. So what we can really talk about is specific fact-based data within our state. So let me talk just briefly about the report itself. Why do we do this? Well, we've been the custodian and the administrator of crime data on behalf of the state of Washington. So in other words, we're partners with the state of Washington. And we've been doing this again since 1980, so for many decades. The 44th annual publication is this one of the Uniform Crime Report. And you can see there that it contains criminal offenses, arrests, law enforcement officers assaulted or killed each year, the number of full-time law enforcement employees rather than in each agency. And then there I just put our website, because particularly for those of you who are watching, if this is recorded later, if you're watching live, that website right there has the Crime in Washington report. You can access it today. It's a 600-plus page document. It is every single year, all the way back to 1980. You can access all that information yourself anytime you wish. By the way, who pays for this? It's funded through the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, or CJTC, through the state of Washington in partnership with us at the Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. And we have a separate unit called the Criminal Justice Information Support, or CJIS department, which is responsible for this. The details about what this data is, where it comes from, is in the introduction, which is at Roman numeral X of the report, including the relationship between FBI reports and the types of data collected. Again, I'm going through a lot of information, but if you want more about the sort of granular detail of where this comes from, that's where it comes from. So what's in here? It's statewide crime information for the year 2023. It has all crime data individually by agency. So county, city, state, tribal, reported to us, to the Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. It has staffing data for every agency, all the archive database data all the way back to 1980, as I mentioned. And then we will in turn forward this to the FBI, where they publish their Crime in the U.S. annual report, which will come this fall. So of course you may say, yeah, there's a long lag time there, and there is. It's one of the real challenges with crime statistics right now. But the searchable databases that the FBI puts out is under what they call the Crime Data Explorer, and that database is, as I mentioned, is 1 year behind. It just gives us information about what's going on. What are the trends out there right now, statewide? And again, there's a lot of interest in this, so we want to talk more about that. All the data, by the way, is a snapshot, a point in time, and the point in time is March 26th, 2024. So that's the date at which these numbers were effective. We then continue to correct those and perfect that data as we go on. We don't just leave it there. So some of this has been updated since March of 2024, just a few months ago, but we'll update that as it comes in. So, big picture, where are we? I'll say this. There's a lot of stories nationally right now where they're talking about 50-year lows in crime trends, 50-year lows in violent crime, that we're back to pre-pandemic levels. I just want to say loud and clear, we're seeing some decreases, some promising numbers in crime rates and crime numbers in the state of Washington, but we are nowhere near pre-pandemic levels. We are nowhere near 50-year violent crime levels, in terms of violent crime levels being 50-year lows. We're seeing some small decreases, which is good. In 2022, we had an all-time high number of murders of 399. So that was in 2022. In 2023, the number that we're talking about today, the recorded number is 376. So 376, that's a 5.8% reduction over 2022. However, I should note that is 87% higher than in 2019. Our overall violent crime rate fell 5.5% in the state of Washington in 2023, and our property crime, as you can see, fell almost 12% in 2023 as well. Vehicle theft was unfortunately not following the same trend. It was up again, a 5.4% increase. 54,187 vehicles were stolen in the state of Washington just in 2023. That's over 6,700 more that were stolen in 2022, which was a very bad year for us. We've seen an increase in vehicle thefts of 112% since 2019. Another concerning statistic is that we're seeing more juveniles involved in crime. Over 20% of arrestees for motor vehicle theft in 2023 were juveniles. And we've seen an increase just from 2022 to 23 of 24% in juveniles arrested. So juvenile arrests are up 24% in just 1 year in the year 2023. Now at the bottom, I put an asterisk just for your information. As I mentioned, we continue to update these numbers as they come in and as agencies perfect and correct some of those numbers as they get more cases coming in and cleared. So the updated murders as of today are actually at 382. But again, we wanted to give you that snapshot number. So we're going to stay with the snapshot number as of March. But with all the updates, we're now up to 382. You might remember last year we had 394 as the homicide number. That was updated to 399 by the end of the year. So again, if people have questions about, well, where are those numbers coming from? It's because they're updated continually as we go. Let's talk a little bit more about murders or homicides. This is the actual number of murders per year between 1980 and 2023. And you can see that in 2019, we had just 201. The trend, this is the actual number. This is not the murder rate, but actually the actual number of murders. So there was last year the highest number of murders ever in the history of our state, but that did not factor for population increases. So take a look instead at the murder rate, where we do take into account the population increases in our state over that time. So if you take into account the murder rate, the incidents per thousand, we had a rate in 2022 of 0.5 per thousand, a very slight decrease, but we still have the same murder rate, which is 0.5 per thousand in 2023. And that is still slightly lower than the highest murder rate we had, which was in the mid-90s and also in the late 80s. So again, that just gives you an idea of what the murder rate is over time. But again, I'll go back to what some folks are talking about, which is all-time lows in violent crime or all-time lows in homicides. You can see that whether you're looking at the actual number or the murder rate, we are still substantially higher than we were prior to the pandemic and substantially higher than we were in, let's say, 2015 to 2020. Here's just a graph showing you the number of murders by year since 2019, and you can see that there was a small decrease, thankfully, in 2023. Also have this number up, which again, there's much more data within the report, but in terms of thefts between 2019 and 2023, you saw that it was going up year over year until 2022. We've seen a decline in 2023. I have spoken to a number of chiefs, particularly those with larger malls or a lot of retail, to see if this is reflecting what they're seeing. And their comment to me is that this is not necessarily reflecting what they're seeing. There may be issues related to reporting in terms of theft, particularly shoplifting. And I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more if you'd like to. But remember that theft number, that also includes organized retail theft and regular shoplifting, which continues to be an issue. And so, again, if you'd like to talk more about potentially some reporting there in terms of reporting from victims, I'm happy to do that. Motor vehicle theft, as I mentioned, this is one that is not going down. We've seen substantial increases since 2019, and it went up again this year. A lot of issues related to this that we've talked a lot about the last few years. Changes in use of force standards, changes in police staffing, changes in pursuit restrictions. More and more people are using preventive efforts like the club, like software updates, particularly for Hyundais and Kias. We're seeing some changes in some of those trends. Some jails are removing restrictions so that people who steal cars can be booked into jail. That's been a good thing. I would just remind folks that most of the vehicles that are stolen in our state are older vehicles. They're vehicles belonging to people who can least afford being a victim of crime in terms of vehicle theft, and it can turn their life upside down. So this is a really concerning number for all of us. I would add that we are seeing more money for task forces coming from the legislature to fight motor vehicle theft. There's more use and more money for technology coming from the legislature, which is a good thing. And we're also looking for things like greater sentencing and the ability to seize vehicles to really start to combat motor vehicle theft. Let's take a look at violent crime and historical data. So this is violent crime overall. Violent crime means murders, robberies, rapes, and aggravated assaults. This is just the actual number year over year back to 1980. And you can see that the numbers are the highest ever, just in terms of numbers themselves the last few years. But again, that does not include population growth. In terms of violent crime and historical data in Washington State, the highest violent crime rate that this state has ever had in the time that we've been tracking it since 1980 was in 1992, when it was 5.39 incidents per thousand. The lowest was in 2015, that was 2.66, as you can see. In 2023, that number is 3.56, so substantially above the lowest that we've seen, but also well below the highest. I will note that between 2015 and 2023, we've seen a 34% increase in the violent crime rate. And between 2019 and last year, there's a 20% increase. And again, just pointing out what violent crime means, according to the FBI, an aggravated assault, by the way, includes dangerous weapons, serious injuries, and is more than somebody being slapped or punched. Here's the historical graph with population factored for violent crime. And again, I bring this up because a lot of what we've seen from media in other states, national media, has been that violent crime is headed toward a 50-year low. We're not seeing that in our state. If you look at the 50-year low, that is around 10 or 12 years ago, and we are nowhere near that. But there is a downward slope, which is a good thing, but we have much, much more work to do. Let's talk about hate crimes. This is found starting on page 71 in the Crime in Washington report for 2023. Hate crimes increased 6%, with 576 hate crimes reported in our state, compared to, as you can see, 544 the year before. I put the definition up here because it's important. A hate crime must involve a crime. A hate crime is not a crime itself. There must be a separate criminal offense against a person or property, motivated in whole or in part by the offender's bias against that person. And you can see what those factors are. And the report has bias motivation info and incidents, by the way, separated by jurisdiction. I point this out because if you're interested in what's going on in your community, if you're interested in seeing what's being reported in your community, it's all right there in this report. It shows how those crimes are being reported, what's being reported, and who the victims are of these hate crimes within your local jurisdiction. Really important information for people to have, and it's all in the Crime in Washington report. I will mention that the most frequent types of hate crimes that we're seeing reported, you can see there, intimidation is the most common at 264, destruction of property or vandalism, that was up from number 3 last year, and then simple assault, again, slapping, punching, but up 11% from last year is aggravated assault. And the FBI definition of aggravated assault, I just wanted to read this, is an unlawful attack using a dangerous weapon or displays in a threatening manner where the victim suffers obvious, severe bodily injury or risk and has things like broken bones, loss of teeth, possible internal injury, severe lacerations, or loss of consciousness. These are severe assaults, and we had 79 of those last year related to hate crime. in the state of Washington. That should be a number that should be very concerning to us and should point to the fact that we have to do even more to combat hate crime. I just want to show you as well, for each of these individual areas of bias motivation, the most frequently cited bias motivation for these individual hate crimes. For race, you can see it's anti-Black, anti-African American. For religion, it is anti-Jewish. For disability, anti-mental disability. For gender or gender identity, it is anti-transgender. And for sexual orientation, anti-LGBTQ. Again, if you want to look at what's being reported in your community, that's going to begin on page 71. And I say this every single year, but I want to say it again. Hate crimes are a factor of reporting. We want these to be reported. Law enforcement needs these to be reported. And all of the community has to feel comfortable reporting these types of crime to the local law enforcement agency. Law enforcement continues to get better and better at taking these reports, doing something about it to follow up. And again, this is an important issue for everybody. Talk a lot about disproportionality. And one of the things that is tracked in our Crime in Washington report is victims by race. The Crime in Washington report, 600 plus pages, every single one of those numbers is a victim. And as we talk about disproportionality, I think it's important for us to recognize, I took some of these numbers to show that if you look at, for example, Black Washingtonians, who make up a little over 4% of the state population, make up 23% of victims of murder. A little over 4% of the state of Washington, but they make up 16%. They're 4 times more likely to be a victim of aggravated assault, over twice as likely to be a victim of robbery, twice as likely to be a victim of motor vehicle theft. These are the kinds of things that, again, are in our Crime in Washington report, and I think are important for all of us to continue to pay attention to. As I mentioned last year, we talked quite a bit about law enforcement staffing. There's a lot of discussion in the public discourse right now about law enforcement staffing. We're seeing some consensus about how important it is to have an adequate number of law enforcement officers. So for 2023, I want to go back to 2021. You may remember that our staffing was way, way down in 2021. An almost 500 officer net loss statewide of the number of officers we had in our state. We were over 11,000 at one point, went way under 11,000. So there was a net loss. In other words, if you take all the officers who came in, who were hired and started new, and then all those that left or retired, the net loss was almost 500. It took us down to 1.38 officers per capita. That was and is the lowest in the nation by far. 2022, staffing continued downward with another 70 officers lost net statewide, which took us down to 1.36 officers per capita. So in 2023, staffing actually came up a little bit. 92 was the net gain of officers to 10,760. So that is a good sign that we are gaining more than we're losing, but I can't put too fine of a point on this. We are not even really treading water because with the increase in population of our state, the per capita staffing actually went down again to 1.35. Credit to the state of Washington, credit to our legislators, credit to our agencies. There is increased capacity with regional training centers. We're increasing capacity on recruitment and training. But even with all that, that really speaks to the challenge that we have in front of us as the number of officers available to respond to calls continues to decrease, even with that small net gain in officers, because we have a larger population. And again, I'll just say Washington State ranks 51st in the nation in staffing. This is the 13th straight year of being last in the nation in law enforcement staffing. Here's the officers per capita as a graph. You can see that it's really been just a massive downward trend the last couple of decades, and it's really accelerated in the last 4 or 5 years. And it's beginning to even out just a little bit in the last year, but we have much, much more work to do on that. There, again, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of focus on staffing and why that's important. One of the things I want to mention, because I'm often asked this question, we did include in this graph state patrol troopers, university police. This is all sworn officers. So this isn't only city or county officers and deputies. This is all sworn officers, including troopers, including university police, because we wanted to put everybody in Remember that a sworn officer means someone who is armed, who is certified by the state, and who can make arrests. So every officer is included in that number, and it's still that low. Just a couple things to talk about in terms of population and law enforcement staffing. As we went down to 1.35 officers per thousand, that's the lowest per capita rate we've recorded. We've gone down each of the last 3 years. Every year is another record low. The 2022, the most recent data we have for national average per capita rate nationwide is 2.31. That's the average. So that's just the average in our country, or in our nation, I should say. Now, here's another way to think about this. We have about 10,700 law enforcement officers in the state of Washington. If we were to get to the national average of 2.31 officers per capita, we would need to hire 8,000 more officers, an 80% increase in officers just to get to the average in our state. So if you're asking yourself, what's the right number, something to at least think about it, the national average is 2.31, and we are 8,000 behind in this state. We also track assaults on officers. It's good to see that went down 2% since 2022, a small decrease, but we're up over 17% since 2019, which is somewhat reflective of what officers are telling us in terms of what they're seeing out there. This is a slide that I put up last year, and I left it because I think it's important to say again. This isn't just a matter of let's have more police officers. The reason that more police officers matter is we need to provide justice for all victims. And the fewer officers we have, the less ability there is to provide justice for victims. If you talk to law enforcement officers, and I do all the time, their frustration isn't with, the work or the hours or the things they run into. It's the inability to provide justice for victims. That's why officers do this. If you have fewer officers, you move into a much more reactive response. You can do much less follow-up and investigation for those victims. And there's also fewer people on scene to properly de-escalate when necessary and ensure the scene is safe. There's fewer resources to provide that behavioral health assistance, that field response that we want for folks, particularly that might be experiencing behavioral health issues. We have much slower response times, which is frustrating for people. It reduces faith in government and government service. The fact is, corrections and communications in law enforcement are also impacted. And then there's just greater frustration and burnout. As I mentioned, when officers don't feel that they can serve victims and provide justice, that causes them to burn out. The more officers leave, it makes the problem worse. It becomes a vicious cycle. And as I mentioned, I was hoping that I can come today and say, we're up 500 officers or up 1,000 officers. And unfortunately, it's less than 100. So we're still treading water. We have more work to do. And we'll track this number carefully as we go into 2024. But I know that there's a lot of momentum behind making sure that agencies can get properly staffed, which is a good thing. We want to continue to focus on that. I'm not going to read this entire slide. I put it in there. And by the way, if anyone's watching this at home and you're interested in this PowerPoint, we'd be happy to send it to you. It just explains the difference between NIBRS, which is the current reporting system that the FBI has, and the previous system. They've been transitioning out of it for a number of years. Washington State is entirely transitioned to the new system, and we have an extremely high rate of reporting compared to other states. So when you hear about other states who, a lot of agencies don't report, or there's a very, different kinds of data coming in and they can't compare it. The good thing is in Washington State, our rate of reporting is extremely high. We can compare apples to apples. And Axios, in fact, did a story this past year talking about how our data is really at a high level. It's kind of a model for other states, which is a good thing. A couple cautions on comparisons. There's specific FBI rules on what's counted and how you can and the kind of categories you have to use. We have to fit those FBI categories. They don't always easily translate to Washington criminal offenses, not perfectly. The FBI, because they don't get perfect data from the rest of the country, they sometimes use estimates. So again, all I can talk about is the Crime in Washington report, the data we have, and talk about the specificity and the reliability of that data. And then just remember that correlation and causation are not the same thing. We always have to be asking about the why behind why is something happening. And then I do have a Pew Research article there just as a resource for folks about what the data says about crime statistics in the United States and how to look at those in a good objective way. So again, it's just a resource for people. I put this up because this is a couple stories, one of which is from NBC News, the other from Pointer, but it talks there, and again, I'm not going to read, but it talks about, it's a professor from University of Chicago who says, well, we've seen from some of these numbers from some cities across the country using estimates and extrapolations that, crime has returned to pre-pandemic levels, and it's just a matter of how much lower it will go. The other article says violent crimes at a 50-year low. Be cognizant about data and where you're getting it from. We're showing you data showing we are seeing some good numbers in terms of some decreases in crime in our state. That is a good thing, no matter what. It is not anywhere near pre-pandemic levels. It's nowhere near 50-year lows. We have much more work to do. And let's be very straightforward about what that data says and why. The 2023 Crime in Washington report is available right now on our website. The data goes back to 1980, as I mentioned. It's 600 pages long each year. If you have further data or things that you need for a resource, we will respond to those requests from researchers and the public. And as I mentioned, this will go to the FBI, who will publish this again in the fall. Just want to say this. First of all, I want to thank Joan Smith and our CGIS group who do such great work on this. If you have questions specifically about what's going on in your community, ask your chief, ask your sheriff. These are resources for all of us to use to find out what's next. How can we do this better? As I mentioned, there's getting to be a lot of consensus about the importance of public safety, the importance of why we have to improve public safety in the state of Washington. We've talked about data, we've talked about staffing. Remember, all of these data represent victims. Every single number in this 600 plus pages of numbers is a victim. And I was talking to somebody earlier this morning, and the example that I think about is burglary. Sometimes people think of burglary as a property crime. It's not robbery or rape or murder, it's a burglary. They say, well, that's kind of minor. As a police officer, I know I've talked to people who have suffered burglaries. They've come home to find their homes ransacked, and they can't live there anymore. They never feel safe there again. They never feel secure and stable. They never have that peace of mind, and they end up moving. It turns their lives upside down. I mentioned that because it's one example of all these numbers and all these graphs in this 600-page report. They're all victims. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're paying attention to this. With that, again, I want to thank our staff for the really good work on this, and happy to take questions.
A lot of credit to everything that happened. Is there any particular strategy that you'd like to see more to officers, or do you have ideas of what can support staffing?
In terms of increasing staffing statewide? I would tell you this, a couple things. First of all, I talked to agencies that are doing pretty well on staffing right now. They're starting to get a lot of their vacant spots filled. Others continue to really, really struggle. In the big picture, I think the most important thing that we can do as a state is to, number one, recognize the importance of public safety, why it's important to have transparent, fair, balanced policing that's accountable, but also to just make sure that officers feel comfortable and supported. They know what's expected of them so that they feel comfortable doing their job day to day. They don't have to feel anxious, because what I hear a lot from officers is they feel anxious about their job each day, that they don't necessarily know what's expected of them. We expect too much in some communities. And as we work through all the ups and downs of the last few years, I think now is the time to sort of move forward. And, this is a good time for our state to come together. And I'm starting to see that, where people say, you know what, we need good policing. Let's support good policing and make sure that good people feel really comfortable doing this job.
I know we've spoken to a lot of agencies about the difficulties of questioning juveniles if they're involved in crimes, given state laws. And then there was maybe sort of fix that was on the agenda last year, but didn't quite go through. Is that on the agenda again this year? How confident are you that we'll be able to get something like that through?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure, I'm sorry. The question was, there's been a lot of concerns about the ability to question juveniles, and that may be, in fact, likely is related to the 24% increase in juvenile arrests that we've seen year to year. That has been a legislative issue for the sheriffs and chiefs and for many others in the last couple of years. I would say this, I think that the difficulties and challenges that have been cited about being able to question and speak to juveniles as suspects or witnesses is a huge issue. I think it has had a negative effect on juvenile crime, and it's in some ways, it's not the entire reason, but I think it's part of the increase we've seen in juvenile arrests. I spoke to a chief just this morning who said that they had a very serious incident involving a homicide with 2 juveniles, and they've really had a lot of challenges with following up on that because of some of the restrictions in state law. I will say this, we have legislators on both sides of the aisle that clearly see that. They want to ensure that juveniles know about their rights. I think everybody agrees on that. But I fully expect that will be changed in the next session, because I think everyone starts to understand that that's a huge issue. It continues to be a major issue in our state. And it may seem like inside baseball and sort of legalistic, but we're seeing the real effects on the street, unfortunately.
You mentioned with fewer officers, the response has been reactive. So are we saying we have more officers, we can be proactive?
Exactly right. I'm sorry. The question was, I talk about how when we don't have enough officers, law enforcement becomes too reactive. Sometimes I call it hit and run policing. Get to the call, do all you can get out, get on to the next call. When there are more officers, they're able to respond to the call more quickly, maintain evidence when necessary, deal with victims, deal with the family, follow up. And in too many communities, we don't have any of that right now. It's just as much as you can with the few officers that you have, and then get on to the next one. That's horrible for officers. They can't serve victims. And of course, it's horrible for victims. It's bad for the community. They're not getting the follow-up that they absolutely deserve. And people become cynical. They have less trust in their government, less trust in institutions. Everything we're talking about is all related here. Like I said, it's not about let's just throw more law enforcement, people at this problem. It's about serving victims, and it's about making sure the communities understand that they deserve the service that they should get, and real follow-up for victims. And so moving from that purely reactive mode to being able to really follow up, find who's responsible, deliver justice, spend time with people who need to be heard. Victims need to be heard. And too frequently now, I hear from officers all the time, it's awful. I don't have the time to spend with victims that I want to. And that's really what this is all about. Thank you.
We have questions from online, and Steve will be able to read them and then respond. And to those of you online, if you could raise your hand and we can unmute you, or please put your question in the chat. Thank you.
Sure. And the first question, I'll just go ahead and read it. It's from Carlene Johnson. What will help curb the uptick in juvenile crime? Does WASPC have any position on how decriminalization of harder drugs has fed crime? So there's kind of two things going on at the same time here. We're presenting our data in our role as stewards of that data, but you're also asking me a question about a little bit about advocacy and legislation, which is also part of what we do. If I could completely curb the uptick in juvenile crime, I would tell you what that answer is. I don't have a simple answer to that. I don't think anybody does. Providing the right kinds of services, we're seeing real struggles right now at the state level with juvenile rehabilitation, and they're restricting entry into those things. The issue of juvenile crime, I think, is going to be a really substantial issue for this state for the next couple of years, because as we see the juvenile involvement in violent crime go up, we're going to need to respond to this much more, I think, proactively than we are so far. The solution, I think, is going to be a complex one that is going to require us to get out of our corners a little bit and understand that juveniles do need to be held accountable when necessary, 100%. At the same time, nobody wants juveniles to be permanently labeled. That's that balance we have to strike, but it's going to be really challenging, I'm here to tell you. Do we have a position on how decriminalization of hard drugs has fed crime? We do. We have opposed the decriminalization of drugs. We opposed some of the less assertive versions of the Blake bill, and we are continuing to look at how the issue of drugs is evolving in our state, and making sure that criminal sanctions, when necessary, are part of the leverage of getting people off the street. The next one, Nick Hawthorne says, this question may be too granular, but does the report recognize how many times bear spray was used in a violent crime, assault or robbery? Any Washington police seeing an increase in criminals using bear spray? I'm going to look over at Joan, and she's shaking her hand. The answer is no. However, you can see different types of weapons, but they do not include bear spray. But you can see if it's a firearm, a knife, those kinds of things. So it breaks it down, but not into that specific granular level. So no.
Are there any other questions online? If you could raise your hand or type it in the question chat box, we can unmute you.
Second. Very good.
Really quick.
There's more questions.
Of course. Happy to.
That happened last year, or is that? Repeat the question.
I'm sorry. The question was, in terms of the number of anti-Jewish hate crimes, is that something that's newer, or have we seen a spike? I would have to review the data to see if there's a specific spike over last year. I don't know that off the top of my head. A quick review of the report would tell us that. I certainly suspect that that is the case, but we would have to confirm that through data. Thank you.
Against Black but they probably the most crimes in our state. What do we say to Black and Americans when it comes to these crimes? As you mentioned, some of them may not feel like they're being heard, their case is not going resolved. What do we say to this community?
That's a good question. The question you ask is, what do we say to communities of color? What do we say to the Black community in terms of this disproportionality that we're seeing with any number of crimes, including murder, aggravated assault, and so many others, motor vehicle theft. And the same is true of some other communities of color as well. I wanted to mention that to bring that very point up, which is we talk about disproportionality appropriately in the criminal justice system. We should also make sure we're talking about it in terms of victimization, because the disproportionality of victimization for persons of color is not acceptable. It isn't. And if we're going to build the right criminal justice system that is fair and that is effective and that works for everyone, it has to pay attention to everyone. And we have to be very attentive to that disproportionality. It's one of the reasons that we do have victimization rates by race within our report, because that's exactly what I think all of us as Washingtonians have to pay attention to. Thank you.
Okay, we have Christine. We're going to unmute you. You can state your. You should unmute yourself and state your.
Unmuted. Hi, Steve. Christine Claridge, Axios. I am just wondering, can you describe a little bit about what crimes against society is?
This is one of those moments where it's like, I hope I don't get that question about what crimes are against society here. Crimes against society is and again, I'm going back to, I can look it up. You have crimes against persons, which makes sense. Robbery, murder, assault, crimes against property, theft, burglary, those kinds of things. Crimes against society are things like a drug offense, trafficking, prostitution. Am I missing something, John? Gambling. It's the kinds of things that are sometimes used to be called vice crimes. That's a little more specific area, but it's those things that, again, like it sounds, it's a crime against society as opposed to a property or a person. So I'm not sure that's a perfect answer, but does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Other questions from online? Room.
I appreciate everybody's time and I appreciate everybody being here, and stay safe. Have a great day. Thank you.